Good afternoon. It's nice to be with you all. As Chaz just mentioned, my days right now are split between seeing clients and navigating conflict with them and their family relationships and living in my own family conflict and relationships, particularly with a 2.5-year-old right now. Her gap in reasoning includes she's potty training, and so she doesn't understand when things go in the toilet, you're really not supposed to reach in and grab and do things. So that's the type of conflict I'm living with right now. But before I was a wife and a mother, I was a daughter and I was a sister. I am the oldest of two more siblings beneath me, my sister and my younger brother. And I'm curious about you all, where you fit. Do I need to move that? Okay. Where you are in your family. And so I'm curious who else in this room might be the oldest, like I am. Are there? Oh, that's a lot. Okay. Who in here is a baby in your family? Who might be in the middle? One of. And I know it actually gets complicated now. If any of you are part of blended families, sometimes you're both the oldest and then a middle, because your family is combined and there's steps and halves and all that. So regardless of where you are, if you're the oldest or you're only child. I left you guys out. I'm sorry. Regardless of where you fall in your family birth order with your siblings, by very nature of you being in college now and likely moving out of the family home, and you may even still be living in the family home, but you're now at this phase in your life and you're taking classes and you're a college student, you're changing your family dynamic. Culturally and developmentally, just going to college is a marker of you're moving into adulthood and things are changing. I remember my brother is almost 10 years younger than me, so when I packed up my car and I moved out to school, there's a picture of me and him, and he's, yay tall, the little 7th grader, and now, it's this over 6-foot brother, and I look at this picture and I go back to the feelings I had then, which were, oh my gosh, I am changing my family forever. I am leaving my family. We were a family that did dinners together, and even at that age when I was moving into college, we would still, a couple times a week have dinner together, and I wasn't going to be there for my little 7th grade brother anymore. And that was a big feeling I had of, what do I do with that feeling that I am now moving out, I'm supposed to be doing this is the way it goes, but I'm changing my family forever. And so that may resonate with some of you. And even if it doesn't, the fact, again, that you're a college student means that developmentally and culturally, your family that you knew it is changing because you're here. So this can be incredibly difficult for both you and for your parent. So I want to start with your parent first. I'm sure there's so many of you in this room that the favorite function on your parent's smartphone is the text function. Yes? Are you receiving texts from your parents now that they know how to do that? I feel like a lot of times you're away from home, but they haven't really gotten that memo, and so they're texting and keeping tabs and wanting to know what they're doing, and there's all these, GPS things that they can actually find out where you are. And I want to read you guys something from, this is a Boston Globe article from November 13th of last year. It starts out saying, everyone has heard of parents who do their grade school or science projects or who are overly involved in their kids' social lives. But the infamous helicopter parents, you've heard of them, right? Helicopter parents who are hovering over their younger children are now transitioning into so-called snowplow parents. Have you heard this phrase? Okay, snowplow parents are trying to smooth a path for their kids even after they've already started college. So here's what I would like to call the horror stories. There's a college professor who heard a story about a woman who was in her class who left campus to go visit a friend at another university, and when her parents didn't hear from her in over 24 hours, they had an Amber Alert issued for her. So I'm guessing she's 18 to 22, so that's a problem. Another one is a young man who's interviewing for a summer job, and his mom stood outside the door and actually knocked and wanted to come in and involve herself in the interview. He was not hired. There is a woman who runs a restaurant group in Boston, and she said, this is a quote from her, she said, oftentimes we see snowplow parents come in with their son or daughter to apply for a job. They say things like, I'm here with my son Mark. Mark's standing right next to us. Mark is applying for a busboy position. And she said, Mark is standing right there not saying a word. We're thinking, if Mark can't talk to us, how can he interact with our staff and our customers? So technology has created all these things that make it difficult for us to actually separate from our parents. A recent study of college freshmen and sophomores has shown on average that students are communicating with their parents at least twice a day, and about 3/4 of you guys feel like that's too much. A professor at Northeastern University said she was talking to she's also a therapist, she was talking to a client, and she said that among this client's friends, these women, they would call their college-age students 7 to 8 times a day. So, last thing I'm going to say from this article that was fascinating. Does this resonate with you guys? Yes, no, a little bit? Okay. This is the most extreme case I have heard. In 2012, a student won a protective order against her parents for stalking and harassing her. So poor Aubrey Ireland, who's 21 years old, was going to school in Cincinnati, and her parents would often drive 600 miles from their Canvas home to visit her at the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati. They would show up unannounced. They would schedule meetings with college officials, and they would falsely accuse her of promiscuity, drug use, and mental problems. So her parents, you guys are so sympathetic, or you're terrified. Her parents admitted in court that they installed monitoring software on their daughter's laptop and cell phone, but they said they only had her best interests at heart because she's an only child who was catered to her whole life by loving parents. Okay, so conflict producing, yes? So for the parent, this can be very, very difficult and anxiety provoking for your parent to send you off to the great beyond of school, right? But this can also be anxiety provoking for you guys too. I lost my place here. So perhaps, you're sitting here and your parent has already turned your old room into the guest room, craft room combo, right? And you're still needing a little bit more from them, and they're ready to say, peace out, we've done our part. And that can be difficult. When I lived in England for a couple of years, about 10 years ago, and I remember that there was a study that was reported in the London Times, and it said Britons prefer 3 types of jam. So if you would go to a grocery store in England, you would see, you go to a grocery store here, you'd see a whole row of, different kinds of jam. And the study was saying for young Britons, those who were coming of age in Britain at the time, they were faced with overchoice. There were just too many choices. How do I choose whether I want apricot or strawberry? And then if I want sugar-free or I want, all these different things. And it was just too much choice. And I imagine that's something we can all relate to too. And that's a perfect thing to be discussing with our parents. But if they feel emotionally or literally unavailable to us, that can be conflict producing for us, because you guys are in a season where you're making decision after decision after decision, and oftentimes it's so easy to second guess ourselves and wonder, am I making the right choice? Or I'm faced with over choice, right? So this is a very potentially a very conflict producing season in your life. So what I want to do with you guys today is I want to do 2 different things. I want to help us understand, hopefully, a bit more why in this season it might be more difficult than in other seasons. And I also want to give you some tools to help you manage yourself, because the sad truth of this is we actually can't manage your parents, and you can't change them. And I wish I could say, hey, you'll go away from today and you'll know exactly, in your next fight with your parents, what to do and what to say and how that'll never happen again. But every interaction we have with them are so dynamic and fluid. And let me say, this is beyond your parents, right? This is with your roommate. This is with your best friend. This is with your brothers and sisters, with your employer. Some of you might be married in this room. And most of you will be married at some point. Conflict is going to keep coming up. So I'm hoping that some of the tools I offer you guys today will be things that you will take with you and will be helpful across the board, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So the way in which I'm going to talk about first that this season I think can be difficult is I want to talk about the brain. So I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm not a neurobiologist or science person. I don't have it in my backgrounds, but I'm fascinated by the brain and what's going on. And so I've spent a little bit of time researching that, but also lifting that from other people. So I'm going to give you guys your brain for dummies, okay? So this is all stolen from other people, but it's what we know about science, okay? So up until you're 25 years old, your brain is functioning differently than the over 25-year-old brain, Okay, so the under 25-year-old brain and the over 25-year-old brain are actually functioning differently. A great example of this is regulating our sleep cycles. So when we, chemicals that are released in our brain to wake us up and ramp us down, the first one is cortisol, and it wakes us up and it signals to your brain, start waking up and start getting going with your day. And at evening, we have a nighttime release of melatonin, and melatonin is saying, okay, it's time to start ramping down. You're going to need to transition from all this awakeness to going to sleep. Well, the average over 25-year-old brain, the melatonin release kicks in around 10 p.m. Do you know what the average time, any guess on the average time for the under 25-year-old brain? So close, 1 a.m., right? Yeah, so that's a huge difference about what chemicals are being released in your brain. So that's just one little instance, but I want to use that as a launching pad as to how the brains are different. So here's the part that I'm interested as it relates to conflict with our parents. So the area of your brain that's concerned with consequences, judgments, logic, reason, all these kind of concrete things, it's called your prefrontal cortex, and you've probably heard it referred to as your frontal lobe. It's this part right here, okay? This is the part that is helping you make judgments about things, helping you make decisions, regulating your impulses, and this part is not developed until you're 25, okay? This is, well, my husband's sitting here, but this is why my husband, when he was an undergrad, would think it's a great idea to go order a 2.5-pound burrito at 3 a.m. What could possibly be problematic with that, right? Not real good impulse control. Thought comes in, must act, I'm in the car, I'm getting a burrito, right? So we see this more in 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. My favorite story, however, is about another family member who's not here, about the lack of impulse control. My sister started her career probably around 21. She's a hairstylist, and so she didn't do the traditional college route. And so she went into cosmetology school, and then the next thing was that she apprenticed with someone. So she just finished her apprenticeship. She's probably 21, maybe 22. She's still like gaining all of her skills. There's a lot to learn actually as a cosmetologist. You're doing all these different cuts. You're doing all these different combinations of chemicals to figure out how to dye hair. And in the meantime, I'm working at a church, and I'm working with high school students. And it was a pretty big high school group, and one of the guys who's in my youth group got a modeling gig. So he's like a junior or a senior, and he's going to do this modeling gig. So I'm like, hey, go see my sister, because he wanted to do something, you know, prior to going to whatever he was doing. And at the time, he had this kind of blue, blackish hair that needed to be re-dyed. So he went to her and got his hair dyed and a cut and everything like that. So she dyed his hair, and then she's getting ready to cut his hair, and she gets the razor out, and she just does this. Well, it's supposed to have a clip on it, and she didn't have a clip on it. So instead, he had a like 2-inch swath of scalp the day before his modeling gig, right? So my sister, does this, but poor impulse control, right? So she doesn't think of like, maybe an option would be to actually go, oh my gosh, we got to figure out what we're going to do, and I'm going to include you in this process, and we're going to collaborate, and we're going to problem solve. No. She decides that she has to get him to close his eyes so she can figure out what the heck she's going to do. So she's like, well, why don't we dye your eyebrows to match your hair color? She's like, this is a brilliant solution, right, to get him to close his eyes. So he's closing his eyes, and she's, dyeing his eyebrows. Still can't think of anything because she's ramped up. You know what's going on in your brain right now? She has no frontal lobe access at all, okay? She's totally flooded, can't access it even if she wanted to. Her solution, well, there's hair on the ground. I know. So she gets the what's it called, like the paste, the gel stuff? There's another name for it, I can't think of it. And she glues hair to the back right here and sends him on his way. And I am thinking later, I think it was the day of, I heard this story, and I'm over 25. I'm kind of exaggerating here because it's not like pure under 25 and over 25. But I'm thinking consequences. There's cause and effect. He's going to take a shower. It's going to, go down the drain, and he's going to find out. He didn't come back to youth group. He didn't come back to her as a hairstylist. Obviously, right? So she sent him on his way with a huge piece of his scalp missing. Poor impulse control, frontal lobe not there, not thinking big picture, thinking how do I get myself out of jam right now, okay? So brain development starts in the back, goes to the front. So the last part of your brain to develop is this prefrontal cortex, okay? So the other part that does develop sooner is your amygdala. Do you guys know what your amygdala is the center of? Anybody know? Emotions, the emotional center of your brain, okay? So my sister made a decision from the emotional center of her brain. These are your gut reactions. So generally speaking, adults, again, generally speaking, because not all adults are going to do this, and they're certainly not going to do it well when they're under pressure or they're triggered for some reason, but generally speaking, an adult is going to be able to make a faster, I'm not saying better, I'm saying a faster decision than a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old, or a 21-year-old, okay? So they can access the part of their brain faster. So you can think about why that would be helpful. If you have access to this bigger picture, if you can integrate both the reason, logic, consequence, judgment-making part of your brain, as well as the emotional gut reaction part of your brain, you can hopefully make a pretty informed decision. So, so here's where I want to connect it with your parents, right? How are your parents generally seeing the world then? They're seeing it from here. They're seeing big picture. They're thinking very big. Again, this is generally speaking, this is the well-intended parent. This is not the parent who's consumed with all their own, everything. This is the well-intended good parent, okay? So I don't want to make excuses for parents who don't fit into that category, because there is trauma. There is abuse. There are narcissistic people. There's some of you in this room are dealing with that. So I don't want to make this sound glib or that it's an easy thing like, oh, this is what's going on and this is what's going on. It could be way more complex. But generally speaking, your parent is probably thinking more long-range, big picture, and generally speaking, you guys are coming into a place where it's just the brain is developing in a way and you're integrating all these things. Now, I also want to say that brain development is slow. That doesn't mean that I'm not using the word slow as in unintelligent. I imagine there's many of you in this room that are way smarter and more intelligent than I am. It's just that brain development takes longer, and so I can access things theoretically faster. I will also say it peaks at 25, okay? So you guys are maybe closer to all of this than I'm on the downhill slope of this too. So, and as are your parents, okay? So not knowing this, here's one of the reasons we can get into conflict with our parents, is that they can actually miss you and misunderstand you, because we're coming from two different places. Without a fully developed frontal lobe, we can also misread context, right? So the under 25-year-old brain isn't the best reader scientifically of emotion. Sometimes the under 25-year-old brain won't take in the full picture and look for tone and facial expression and a larger context, that maybe someone's having a bad day and I could consider that too. So here's an example of this, right? So your mom comes to you and says, you know what, I just want to tell you I'm a little concerned. I know that during your time here at Biola, you've changed your major, a few times. I'm just wondering if something's going on. I get the sense maybe you don't really know exactly where you want to go or what you want to do, okay? So your mom, again, the well-intended parent, is probably asking what she thinks is a logical question. This makes sense. They've changed their major. I'd like to check in with them, find out what they're thinking. More often than not, you hear something like that, and what do you think? You get a little on the offensive, right? Like, oh, wait, you don't know, or you don't understand, or get off my back, or, I'm going to be defensive, or I'm going to be offensive, and I'm going to come back at you, because Mom, hold on, you don't understand, right? And so sometimes your brain is mistaking concern for nagging, or curiosity or worry for disappointment, right? You could read into that a number of different things. But if you were to take yourself out of the situation, again, if your parent is well-intended, they might just be asking you a question. What might be going on? I'd like to dialogue with you about this. But for us, it gets I'm putting myself in the college age years. It was very difficult to have those discussions with my parents, and it was a very conflict-producing scenario. At this point, I want to talk about the over 25-year-old brain, and I'm not giving anybody over 25 a pass, right? So just because you're over 25 does not mean, and you all know this, that you're going to always react in emotionally healthy ways, or that you are making good decisions. But what's usually happening is that the person is getting triggered. So you are saying something, and their own fears, insecurities, worries are flaring up. So a great example of this is, hey, I think I want to study abroad. You're saying that to your parent. Really benign, mild kind of thing, right? It's a possibility that your parent would immediately get a little triggered by that, like, oh my gosh. They could go to, how are we going to pay for this? They could go to, well, I'm not going to see you then for an entire semester because we're not going to be able to visit each other. They could go to, does my text function work in, wherever they're going? Something could be triggering your parent, and they're now not in their prefrontal cortex again. They're in their amygdala, and they're working out of their emotional center, okay? So, again, this is, I think, where we just kind of miss each other. So I want us to be able to understand what's going on with the parents. So even though they have the capacity to access this, doesn't mean we're always doing that. So what can we do about this, knowing this about how the brain works? First, I want to suggest that a healthy response to this knowledge would be not denying that it's happening. I get defensive about things really easily. I'm like, no, because I have an advanced brain, or I'm more mature, or whatever. These things are just part of biology, and not denying that it's actually happening. Your brain, science tells us, develops from the back to the front. The last thing to get hardwired, the last thing to gel is this part right here. My husband, a friend of ours, when he turned 25, said, happy gelling or something like that. Your brain finally gelled. It's like, oh, well, okay, thanks for that. So this is the last part to get set. So not to deny that that's happening. Also, I would suggest let's not skip this phase. It sounds like, well, let's get to the place where I'm more advanced or more evolved. I have a 6-month-old at home. So when you're 6 months, you just start eating solid food. And so we give her little little baby foods they're not even, chunky. They're not mashed up. They're just pureed, like banana and sweet potato and pear and all these things. And what you are supposed to do, I don't know if any of you guys know this from personal experience, but you're supposed to introduce a new food every 5 to 7 days. So why are you doing that? You're doing it to watch for any allergic reaction. So if you give them something, you stay on that food for a couple days, so that if you give them then, smashed peas in the afternoon, you can tell that the reaction is for the smashed peas and not from the banana, and that sort of thing, right? So there's a very deliberate process you have to go through in terms of introducing solid foods to your baby. And if I were to skip that and go to what my 2.5-year-old's food of choice is, which are, I ask her all the time, Molly, when we get in the car, where's your favorite place to go? In-N-Out Burger, far and away. We have Disney passes, In-N-Out Burger, okay? So if I were to skip that with my little one and go, oh, she's eating solid food, let's give her an In-N-Out Burger, 2 things would happen. She would have a flavor explosion in her mouth because she has not had hamburger and sauce and cheese, and it's too complex for her, right? The other thing is she's at a risk to choke. So I cannot skip these phases. These phases are there for a reason, okay? Similarly, how do we develop physically? We learn to roll over. Well, we learn to hold our head up. Then eventually we learn to roll over. Then we eventually learn to roll. Then we crawl a little bit. Then eventually we're going to walk along furniture holding things, and eventually we're going to walk. You can't skip those phases, right? So there's this part of us, I think, in our yearning is I just want to be better. I just want to be over this. I just want to be beyond. I think that all the time professionally. Oh, I want to be like this person who's been practicing for, 15 years. Well, I'm getting there, but I'm doing it. The getting there is the living it and the making mistakes and the being with. And I don't want to be in a rush, even though I want to be in a rush, to skip that phase, okay? So what can we do? This is happening. Let's not skip the phase. And then I would say let's have a sense of humor about ourselves. Let's laugh at ourselves. A couple of stories about that. My sister, again, who's my greatest source of stories because she does really ridiculous things. When she was also about this age, because she was working at the same salon, she got a really bad head cold, so she went to the local Rite Aid, and she got her Sudafed or whatever and lined up to pay for it. And she realized, at some point she said, I realized I was taking a little bit longer than I thought it would take, but she's just waiting in line and looking down and doing her thing because she's got a bad head cold. And eventually some woman came up behind and said, are you in line? She said, yeah. And the woman said, well, the line's actually over there. And Kate looked around a little confused, and she goes, you're standing behind a mannequin? So my sister lined up. My sister lined up behind a Halloween display. And as she told this story later, she's like, I really should have known he had a cape on. It was a Dracula guy, mannequin. So she lined up behind Dracula and waited there. And I'm sure a number of people walked by going, and then some sweet woman was like, go get in line. So my sister told us that story. Like, she came home. I remember I was over at my parents for dinner that night, and she came home, and she was like, guess what I did today? I stood in line behind a fake Dracula. So to laugh at ourselves, to develop a sense of humor about things, I think will serve us really well. This happened, this is not as funny or as great as a story, but I did something that I think was very knuckleheady recently. In my therapy practice, I'm part of a larger group, so checks aren't written out to Megen Phillips, they're written out to Journey's Counseling, where I work. So it was a last session, and somebody wrote a check to Megen Phillips, but I didn't catch it until afterwards as I'm going to turn in all my checks. So I have to call them and I have to say, oh, you know what, you actually made the check out to me and not Journey's. Will you please recut me that check? And so they did. They were very gracious to do that, but I'm asking for something, it'd just be easier to deposit it, but I can't. And so they make it out to me, or out to Journey's, and I tell them I'll shred the Megen Phillips ones and just deposit that one. Well, about a month and a half goes by and I get something from our business administrator showing me a Xerox copy of the check made out to Megen Phillips and that it can't be deposited. And I'm like, what in the world? Well, I shredded the check that they recut me. So I asked them to do this thing, and then I go ahead and promptly shred it and still turn in the one I had in the first place. And my natural, I'm like, seriously? But then I laughed about it. I'm like, of course I did that. I am sleep deprived. I have 2 ridiculously high energy children who won't sleep and try to fish things out of the toilet. I'm not thinking. My frontal lobe is not connected at all times. I have to be intentional and I have to connect, okay? So I kind of have to laugh about it, and I have to go, I got to call him back up, and they're not even my client anymore, and ask him for a check. That's a bummer. Like, I acknowledge that's a bummer, but I also go, of course I did that. That's ridiculous. Okay, so those are some things that I want to first think about. And then the second thing I want to think about is to give you guys some tools to what do you do when you find yourself in conflict with your parents or with anyone. What do you do, okay? Because we are going to get irritated, we're going to get frustrated, we're going to get overwhelmed, and we can't control how they're going to react. But how can we learn to control what we do? So I want to suggest that we adapt some things that we probably learned at other stages of our life to what you can do now, okay? So, because I'm with little people now, I'm going to go straight back there first. One of the things most of you guys probably in this room did when you were, baby up until toddler years is you probably had some external source of comfort that you clung to, right? You had a sweet little, stuffed something that probably got really ratty, right? Because you loved it to death. You had a blanket, you had a pacifier, you had something that you could go to if you needed to soothe yourself, right? So we still have those today. So let me also say, if you're a psych major, you know that these are called coping strategies. So I'm going to offer you guys some coping strategies, and this one is called self-soothing, okay? We have self-soothing things that we do now. Here is a perfect one this time of year. Can you see what this says? Yes. Right? Well, this time of year, if it's not 95 degrees out like it has been for so long. The pumpkin spice latte, what does this give you guys when you go and order one of these? What do you feel? Happiness. What else? It's just like coziness in a cup, right? It's just like, I'm feeling so good. All is right with the world again, right? My 2.5-year-old, you stick that little passy in her mouth when she was a baby, it was like, I'm home. I love this, right? So you guys have these things. You have coffee. You have a song you return to. You have a place you go to. You have a particular friend you call up. You have a blog that you read. You have a TV show that you love. That it's that snuggly, comforting, I had a really bad day, but all is right with the world kind of thing, even just for a second. You guys know what I'm talking about? Do you have something that works for you? Can you identify that, and can you return to that? As a therapist, there are things that are healthier than other things, right? So when my client comes in and talks about how their self-soothing of choice is a lot of alcohol, not the best self-soothing option, but going for a run, cool. Watching, 2 shows in the evening before they go to bed, that brings them comfort. So can you identify those things? Those things are going to actually be helpful when you find yourself getting triggered and in conflict. You can go, well, I'm having a really hard conversation now, and I'm going to go get a coffee later. Okay? It's not going to fix it, but it's something that helps you regulate, and that's our goal. So the next coping strategy is one for the preschool age. Did you guys watch Mr. Rogers ever when you were a little kid? Do you love Mr. Rogers? Okay, so Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, remember the little trolley would come through, and where would the trolley go? Do you guys remember where trolley went? Where? The land of make-believe. Okay, and there were a lot of really scary puppets that somehow as a kid we still really liked. But there are all these little freakishly kooky puppets. Daniel Tiger was one of them, okay? Daniel Tiger now has been repurposed for the current preschool age, and he teaches us life skills. So Daniel Tiger is a cartoon that teaches little soundbitey songs to preschoolers that I use all the time, okay, with my preschooler. We're going to watch a little clip of Daniel Tiger. It's so good for little people. So if you are babysitting someone and mom's pulling her hair out, introduce her to Daniel Tiger, because my 2.5-year-old will do that. She'll be like, 1, 2. I mean, it's like, really hard, but it's such, what's happening? What is it forcing the child to do? It's forcing them to access their little teeny underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, right? Because they are just so, and what I like about that too, honestly, it wasn't like, oh, breathe and everything's okay, right? Because he still said, I'm still mad. And I love that this cartoon did that, because it's not like, oh, this is a quick fix and this is going to change everything immediately. It's like, I'm still disappointed, I'm still mad, but maybe I can think of another solution. So I love Daniel. So you guys did it, you guys were awesome. But do that for a second, okay? Just sit for a second, breathe in, and let's count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I want us to go slow. Let's do it again. Breathe in, ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. What happens when you do that? Your problems aren't solved. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm in a better mood. But what happens is you ramp down for just a second. It sounds really silly, but we do forget to breathe. If you're driving along and you're super stressed out, if you take a second just to breathe, period, whether you're mad or some other emotion's overwhelming you, it helps you get just a teeny bit of perspective. It doesn't solve anything. It helps you kind of like, okay, let's regroup, okay? So what can you guys do? You can do Daniel Tiger. It's on Netflix. You can get more. You can find some way to mildly challenge your brain, to go back to reason and logic and get you out of your emotion, right? So your parent, again, or sibling or somebody does something that fires you up, your roommate, your boss, whatever, and you can go, okay, I'm going to say a couple multiplication tables. It's mildly challenging, right? What is 8 times 6? 8 times 7? 8 times 8. Okay, you do like a handful of those. You can do, for little kids, ABCs are good, but for us, ABCs are just almost too rote that you're going ABC, I'm still irritated with you, EFG, So ABCs don't work great, but something that's mildly challenging. Try to think, okay, what did I have for dinner last night? What did I wear yesterday? Okay, what are we doing? We're trying to re-engage our prefrontal cortex and take us out of our amygdala. Make sense? And why are we doing that? It's to diffuse the emotion in the moment. I am very pro-emotion. I feel like more often than not, and I don't know, this isn't scientific, but I feel like as a culture we can kind of go more robotic and more prefrontal cortex and kind of brush aside the emotion and repress the emotion, because that's people I see all day who have put a lid on their emotion for a really long time. And so I'm not saying I don't want you guys turning into just prefrontal cortex robotic people, right? It's that access the emotion, but it's not always helpful. Sometimes we can feel overwhelmed by it, and so we sometimes need to diffuse the emotion in a moment, and then afterwards we can, process it and unpack it. But this would be a good skill to do that, okay? When you're feeling flooded. So another skill that coping strategy you probably picked up at some point in your elementary years or your middle school years is the art of daydreaming, right? So you are doing those multiplication tables when you're in, 5th grade, 4th grade? I don't remember. And you're dreaming about the pizza party that's going to be after your soccer game, right? You can't stay present with what your teacher's asking you to do. You're daydreaming. And so this is that kind of finding your happy place thing. You guys remember Happy Gilmore? Did you guys watch Happy Gilmore? Okay. Yes. I wanted to show you the clip, but I didn't think it was 100% appropriate, so I didn't, so I'm just going to describe it to you. But do you remember when Happy's, what's the guy's name? Is it Shooter McGavin, who's his nemesis? Right. So he's getting under his skin, and Happy's grandma and girlfriend come up, and they're like, we just want you to be happy. And he's like, Grandma wants me to be happy. Do you remember that part? And then he goes kind of to his daydream, and his daydream is his girlfriend's all dressed up and bringing him beer, and then his old coach is back and he's playing that piano. Do you remember that? And he has both hands. Okay, so Happy's like, and then he comes out of it, and it's like, oh, okay. And he's all de-escalated essentially and ramped down. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about daydreaming, but I'm going to give you a more scientific term, which is called mindfulness. And you may be familiar with mindfulness. If you actually Google mindfulness and Biola in the Center for Christian Thought, there are a handful of YouTube videos up that the Center for Christian Thought put up on mindfulness, explaining what it is and leading you through some exercises. So if you find yourself, particularly in moments of conflict or anxiety, these exercises can be really helpful. And it's Daniel Tiger stuff for adults, right? It's breathing, it's bringing things to mind and kind of putting us in a place. So I want to give you an example of what this can look like and what it does. Well, what mindfulness does to identify, tolerate, and reduce difficult, painful, or even frightening emotions. So it's rather than having the sense that you're being pushed around or overwhelmed or engulfed by your emotions, that you can actually learn to have some control over them. So here's an example. So what a mindfulness exercise would ask you to do is to put both of your feet on the floor. So you would be sitting and you would, kind of center yourself. And then you would breathe. It's so silly, but breathing, honestly, sometimes if you just do the breathing, you're good. So you're going to breathe. Let's just breathe, okay? In and out. Breathe in and breathe out. Let's do it one more time because it's just good to do. Breathe in. Breathe out, okay? And so I'm not going to actually do it, but this is what would happen. We're going to do it a teeny bit, I'll say. So this is an example of one that's called a compassion mindfulness. So maybe you're super irritated with someone. You think about someone who you love, someone that you cherish. It says bring to mind someone in your life who is dear and precious to you, okay? So I'm going to think about my little chubby baby who's dear and precious, okay? Now, imagine enfolding that person in this feeling, right? Oh, you're just kind of thinking about that. Oh my gosh, this person is so dear to me. I love this person so much. Okay, so you're kind of just living, and then you keep breathing, and you have your feet on the ground, right? And there's a million of these, but this is one example. So now you start thinking about this person. You start thinking about, man, may this person experience less distress. You're kind of connecting with your compassionate side. So again, this could be with another person. You're irritated with someone else, so you're going to go with another person that you do connect with, or you could even start to think empathetically about this person who's causing you conflict, and you kind of turn the tables. Man, may this person know a decrease in distress. May this person know peace and tranquility, at least for a little while. May this person know happiness and joy, at least for a little while. May this person be able to deal with their suffering. And then you would continue to imagine this person, and eventually your breathing would return to normal, and you would feel a little bit more centered and maybe have a little bit more perspective. So mindfulness, again, there's a whole bunch of exercises out there. There's a whole body of research and resources available. UCLA has something called the UCLA MARC, if you Google it, M-A-R-C, the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center. Daniel Siegel is kind of the guy who's doing a lot of brain stuff, and he does it for like the average person, and he's one of the founders of this UCLA MARC Center, and they have podcasts that you can listen to, and so they're really helpful. So keep that in mind. I use it a lot of times with my patients or clients who are experiencing a lot of anxiety. But as I'm doing all that, I have to, like, my mind immediately goes to, that reminds me of something. That reminds me of prayer. Is that so different for prayer, right? May this person that I'm thinking about, God, would you help them in their distress? Would you hold them? Would you take care of them? Would you allow them to experience decreased suffering, right? That's prayer. Now, prayer is so different from mindfulness because prayer is also doing something on a spiritual level, right? Something is being affected when we pray. We're believing that something can change, that God has power to do something and to act. And that's how I think it's different than mindfulness. But I also want to suggest that prayer can be a really helpful coping strategy. Prayer can focus us. Prayer can center us. Prayer can bring us back into the present. Prayer can connect us with the empathetic parts of ourselves. So sitting with people, presenting them to the Lord, sitting with ourselves, presenting ourselves to the Lord. A friend of mine recently decided to quit her job, and the reason she decided to quit her job, like the final straw, was she was sitting in a meeting with her boss and other people around the table, and the boss just started going nutty, like all manner of unprofessional personal attacks on people in the room and just all sorts of stuff. And my friend said, and I was sitting there practicing my mindfulness because it was all going crazy around me. So a lot of times you can access some of this in the moment, and sometimes it's for afterwards. You get really ramped up. You get really de-escalated. Your frontal lobe is completely, gotten flooded, and you can't go there. Keep these strategies in your back pocket for afterwards. So finally, we talked about what are some strategies that we're linking to, being a little kid, the self-soothing. What are the strategies as a preschooler? And also, I would say similarly as an elementary, middle schooler, these tools that we can have to practice mindfulness and breathing and things like that. And then as a high schooler, you've probably experienced the benefits of just physical activity. A lot of high school kids are involved, and you guys are probably among them, in some sort of sport, dance, something that actually is getting you physically doing something. I had a sophomore English teacher named Mr. Youngerman, and as a sophomore English student, we had to read All Quiet on the Western Front. Have any of you read All Quiet on the Western Front? Okay. I love literature. I could not get into All Quiet on the Western Front, especially as a sophomore. It was like pulling teeth. And my teacher, he recognized that. He knew that we were all just like slowly lulling ourselves to sleep as we were reading this book, because what we would do is we would sit in rows and we'd have to each read a page out loud, and this was like trying to, get us to be interactive in the classroom. And so somebody would read and we'd turn the page and the person behind would read, and it'd get to us. And we knew this was coming because at some point in every class period he would do this. And let me back up and say Mr. Youngerman was a former military guy whose second profession was a teacher. So he's like this big, bulky, bald-headed guy. And we knew it was coming, but still it would shock us. Whistle would blow, shrill whistle, and we'd all jump, and he'd be like, it's time for Youngerman's exercises. And we're like, okay. So he has us all stand up, and we start marching in place. And he would have us do, and I'm trying to remember all the things that we would do, but we'd do these things like he'd yell out orders. He'd be like, now touch your right elbow to your left knee, and you're like trying to keep up, and he would make you do all these things. Well, what did Youngerman know? He knew that sometimes we just got to get out of our brains, right? We got to quit trying to force the issue and engage with this material that we're not really excited about. And so we kind of pump ourselves up and we do all these crazy things. And we're high school sophomores. We're insecure. And we have this tension inside of us between this guy is really kooky / awesome, and I can't believe he's making us do this. But we'd sit back down and you were able to engage again. And I'm guessing at this stage in your life, you've probably had an instance of that where you're writing a paper you're preparing for something and you just go for a walk, or you get out and you go for a run, or you just do something physical and you get yourself out of it and you can return to something fresh. And that actually is another really helpful things to deal with your emotion. It's not doing, you're not moving from your amygdala to your prefrontal cortex, you're not dealing in that realm, but you're getting the blood moving and other chemicals are releasing as well. There's also a preschool song called Shake Your Sillies Out. I don't know if you guys remember that, but you shake your sillies out, and you do these things, and then you jump your jumpies out, and you yawn your sleepies out. And you're doing all these physical things that now you're able to have a little bit of like, okay, I can be settled again. So I wish there was a magic formula so that when you're in conflict with anybody, that you're like, oh, okay, 2 or 3 easy steps and problem solved. That's not the way it is. I'm hoping that by me detailing a little bit about what's going on with our brain chemistry, that we can actually take that knowledge and go, oh, okay, so this is maybe why my parents totally missing me. Or maybe this is why they're acting the way they are, because they're triggered and they're tapping into some of their own fears and insecurities, and it's really not about my decisions or what I'm doing. And so that's the first thing that I hope will be helpful. And the second thing, I hope that some of those tools, and maybe you already know those, and there's a million coping strategies. You guys probably have ones that I've never even thought about, but that you identify those and you hang on to those and you carry and add to those as you go through your life. So conflict is unavoidable. Sorry to say, you're never going to get along with everyone. People pleasers will try to do that. Give up on the endeavor if you can. You're never going to get along with everyone. Some people are just mean. And so how do we manage ourselves, and what do we do with emotions that feel too big or feel overwhelming or threaten us? So, yeah, specifically with your parents, I hope that, again, knowing some of that science will be helpful, and that you'll be able to internalize some of these things so that, and practice them, so that when you find yourself in the middle of them, you can access them easier and easier. So that's what I have for you guys today. I'm going to pray for you, and then I think Chaz is going to come up and give a couple announcements. If you had any questions, I'd be happy to connect. I'll also give a plug for both the Biola Counseling Center and my site, which is Journeys Counseling. If you're finding yourself in deep conflict and you actually feel like you need help navigating that, there are really good people out there. I'd love to connect you with someone, myself or someone else at Journeys, or over at BCC, which is within walking distance. And it's a great, great resource for you guys.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.